Is your heart doing okay? Because guess what? The Jets and Avs are about to get underway this evening with yet another game in what is probably going to be one of the craziest playoff series this year.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. As always, thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day, every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Like I said at the top of the episode, we're gonna be talking about the playoffs, right? Not only the Jets and the Avs, but also talking about the rest of the playoff series because, holy cow, the first round so far has been on some serious drugs. This has been one of the wildest first opening games that I can remember in some time, which I know the Jets and Avs might have kind of tilted the perception a bit, but honestly, just some really high quality hockey, which is always sort of a consequence of a playoff structure where, you have Stanley Cup Finals quality matchups in round one. And obviously that shouldn't really be the case, but until the league changes that, we're just going to have to deal with the fact that some really good teams go home early. And the Jets are definitely trying to avoid that against an Avs team that's been there before, that has tons of playoff experience. But the Jets and Avs aren't the only teams that are obviously trying to stay alive. It is a crazy first game, and we'll get to all of those games from the Eastern Conference, especially the ones that I've been able to watch, and our Western Conference friends as well, because we're going to have to play one of those teams later this episode. But first, let's talk about Game 2 for the Jets, what promises to be another roaring, explosive game. Probably one of the most exciting, but perhaps maybe a little bit less crazy than we saw in Game 1. Before we dive into that, I just wanted to let you know that tonight's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and be sure to use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Now, like I said, the Jets are coming into Game 2 without making too many lineup changes. In fact, as it is right now, Rick Bowness has stated that he is not interested in actually changing anything, which that generally tracks. I wouldn't be shocked if he maybe thinks about one or two tweaks, but overall, I think the lineup is probably going to stay the same. I assume that his mentality is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. For the Jets, I don't know if I quite always agree with that assessment. I think that there are a couple of problem areas where the Jets might think about maybe making a substitution on the back end. I think if you perhaps unscratch one of Miller or Nate Schmidt, you might give yourself a little bit more stability on the back end because Stanley did his best, but he, DeMello, who else? Gosh, Pionk and somebody else, even Sandberg had a rough night, right? They all struggled, and I think the pairing imbalance was kind of obvious. You just didn't have a good pairing with Sandberg and Stanley together. As much as Sandberg has been able to do a lot of the heavy lifting there, last game, unfortunately, he had a little bit more trouble. So, it might be worth giving him a partner that he trusts. And with Pionk, I mean, there's just nothing you can really do there, right? You just have to hope that he has a stronger outing relative to his standards and that Dylan can kind of clean up. While DeMello, he'll have moments where he's a little bit on the slow side, but overall, you sort of expect him to adjust and generally do the job, right? I think that's the main thing with him. Otherwise, I think for the most part, the Jets are really going to focus more on adjusting their tactical approach, right? Winnipeg gave up way too much of the center ice areas, especially in transition. I think the Jets really did a good job of boxing out the Avs towards the edges and the walls, but when it came to the interior slot, Winnipeg really struggled with shutting down that space. And the neutral zone was way too wide open for Colorado to basically skate through. And I think the thing you have to take away from this is that Colorado is at its best when they're in full stride, right? When they have their zone entries with control, where they're the ones skating at full speed, it is very hard to stop them without taking a penalty. And the power play, not one that you want to give a power play to, right? You do not want to take a penalty against that power play unit. They are too lethal. They already scored twice against the Jets. Let's stay disciplined, right? Big thing for the Jets. Stay disciplined, stay out of the box, and you can probably win this at even strength, because for as good as McKinnon was, Lowry handling a lot of those deployments made life a lot easier for the Scheifele line and the fourth line. I would really ask that the second line step up in a big way, because the last game was pretty bad from them, all told. Ehlers had a couple of bright moments. I think Monahan may have had a decent chance, but you had moments where there were some really puzzling decisions. I mentioned it earlier on the last episode, but that Toffoli thing where he really had Ehlers right in the slot and instead opted for the shot, just a mistake. But I think, with a little bit more ice time and maybe some settled nerves, I could see this line starting to gel again like they usually do. It's pretty rare that they struggle in a game, so I'm not going to read too much into it. But otherwise, in terms of the Avs, no real changes. It sounds like Georgiev is probably going to be in net again. Annunen is still sick and is unlikely to return for at least another game or two. The backup is actually going to be Ivan Prosvetov, which Prosvetov doesn't exactly have a great NHL rep. So my guess is they're just going to ride it with Georgiev and hope that he rebounds. I think if it goes south in the second game, they might go back to trying to figure out if they can get Annunen in by the time they get back to Denver, because, Georgiev's kind of sinking the team. I hate to say it, but he's really struggling. It's been one of the worst stretches I've ever seen from a starting goalie. The fact that he has like an 897 and still leads the league in wins is really just a profound testament to how deep and how skilled this Avs team is. They're not as deep in terms of like individual lines as the Jets are, but their superstar talent definitely exceeds what Winnipeg has up front, which not a problem for the Jets, right? So much as it just means you have to do things a little bit more the old-fashioned way, rolling pressure, keeping all four lines rolling, and essentially shutting down a lot of the speed and skill that makes Colorado so dangerous. So a lot to consider for the second game, but given how the Jets did in the first game, honestly, just winning one out of these two games, preferably the first one, sets you up for so much more success. I know it sounds stupid, but starting off the series with a deficit would have been a bit of a problem, right? You kind of want to get off on the right foot early. You want to have the ability to sort of determine and dictate your fate. And if you can get both games at home, you are in really good position and really in the driver's seat to come away with the series win. The Jets have already shown that they can win in Denver without much issue. I don't think that's going to be the case. This time I think it's going to be an absolute dogfight, but the Jets are still confident. I still think that this team has yet to play its best postseason hockey. They certainly played some high-scoring hockey, but in terms of the Jets hockey that we are usually accustomed to, not quite there yet. So we'll see how they adjust. I think Winnipeg has a couple of changes they'd like to make tactically. Like I said, I think the Avs are probably going to be a little bit concerned that they played so well and still lost, because Colorado was definitely the better team in that game. And the fact that they still conceded 7 goals probably sits a little bit sour in their mouths. But for the Jets, get back to what you do best, control the game, and you should have a very good chance of winning game number 2. But, hockey is chaotic. Anything can happen. And like I said, the first round has been fairly chaotic on all sides. We've seen all sorts of craziness, and we'll talk about some of the most startling results and fascinating series so far, both on the Eastern and Western Conference sides, in just a little bit. Before we go any further, though, I do want to shout out our friends and partners at GameTime. When it comes to buying tickets, GameTime knows that a lot of you hate getting hit with surprise fees. You sometimes have to guess where you're sitting. And look, you're paying tons of money for a prime event, and sometimes you're not even sure if your view is going to be obstructed. GameTime totally gets it. They know that you don't want to deal with all of this crap, and they have built up such a promising reputation that they're now even an authorized ticket reseller and marketplace for Major League Baseball. And the best part with GameTime is that as you get closer to either kickoff or first pitch, whatever sport or event you're at, your prices are actually going to go down in the app, because they offer last minute ticket deals, flash sales, zone sales. You name it, they've got it, and they all come backed with the lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, and so much more. For some of you who are probably trying to buy Jets playoff tickets, GameTime might be a fantastic place to look. You'll also see in-venue views from your seat, so you're actually getting a pretty good idea of what you're paying for, which when you're going for the whiteout, you want to have the best view possible of one of the best in-arena experiences in the entire NHL. Even though I live in Baltimore, I can personally attest to how amazing it was several years ago. I'm just biding my time to get back, and maybe I'll pick up tickets with GameTime. For those of you who are first-time customers, though, this is actually a fantastic chance for you to save money because, if you download the GameTime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL, you can get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase with GameTime. Download the GameTime app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for joining us on tonight's episode as we are talking about, the crazy playoffs so far. I said it's been on drugs. It's probably a very tame way of describing it. It's just been insanity. The first round has probably been one of the craziest game ones that we've seen. We do have one game two already, but for the most part, most of these series are just in the first infancy stages. A couple of game twos actually finished earlier this evening as of this recording. Of course, Carolina and New York and Boston and Toronto, which we'll talk about those series. But before we dive into the Eastern Conference playoff picture and what it looks like so far, just wanted to let you know that the Locked On NFL Mock Draft is available now. Find the ultimate 6-episode series on Locked On NFL Draft to hear who our local experts are picking for every franchise, with live reactions from local college football experts and even the fantasy football angle. The Locked On NFL Mock Draft is available now on Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Now, like I said, the Eastern Conference playoffs have been pretty interesting, perhaps not as crazy as the West, but I'll say that there have been some pretty insane endings to a couple of these games, right? Right now, Florida and Tampa Bay, Florida leads 1-0. That was a very tight, close run first game. The Panthers and the Lightning exchanged some good opportunities, but for the most part, it was a pretty tight affair. You didn't really see one team dominating control of the game, and I think the Lightning made a good account of themselves for a squad that I think a lot of people have been down on this year. Obviously, going down 1-0 to the Panthers is not ideal, but the Lightning have a lot of veteran playoff experience, and while the squad is not the same as it was when they were winning cups, still a very talented team and probably not one that you want to sleep on. Of these series, I think the one that's been the least close has been the Rangers versus the Caps, but no one's surprised by that. The Caps basically snuck in on the very last game of the season. They're not a good team. Charlie Lindgren has kind of been one of the big difference makers for this team. I think the only thing that's strange is that Ovechkin actually had a playoff game where he didn't have a shot on goal, which you almost would not imagine could happen. But, given his age and how much he slowed down and this Caps offense not being great, it's not super shocking. If we're talking about any series that could be a sweep, it's probably New York, Washington. I don't think it will be a sweep, but I think of the series that I could see wrapping up pretty quickly, that one is up there. Now, there is one other series that might be a sweep. We've got Carolina and the Islanders, and that one just wrapped up with a crazy, crazy end where Carolina dominated control of the second game and generally played a pretty even game in the first one against the Islanders. Second one, though, was all Canes. Canes dominated from front to back, and the problem for them that they've had is that their finishing talent isn't quite good enough to take advantage of all the zone possession they create. They've got a great cycle game. They forecheck really well. They create lots of chances, but most of them are kind of garden variety. So when you saw that they had like 120 shot attempts to like 30 for the Isles, if it was even 30, I don't even remember. It was a really low number. I think the thing you have to remember is that they do kind of pad some of those stats a little bit with the kind of chances that they create, but make no mistake, right? The Canes kind of played their game, and it should have been enough, but it almost wasn't. The Islanders had a lead for a good portion of the game, and then it took until the last minute and a half for Carolina to tie it on a beautiful Aho tip right on the back door. And then 9 seconds later, Jordan Martinook won a race off the faceoff to the area behind The goalie, he forced a turnover and just sort of caught Varlamov napping. I don't quite know what Varlamov was thinking, but it went off of his left pad or something into the net. And a huge critical come from behind win for the Canes. They're now very much in the driver's seat. If they had dropped this game, you leave just a little bit of doubt for the Islanders to hold on to, a little bit of hope for them to kind of get back in the series. But a 2-0 lead is very commanding if you're a Canes fan. The other series that has probably captured the hearts and minds of those who are neutral observers is Boston-Toronto. That series is now split 1-1, and you saw two very tightly run affairs where, sure, Toronto probably had the better run of offense in the second game, while the Bruins generally had the finishing and goaltending in the first game. But the second game required, one team to make a mistake at the very end of it, and that was enough to split the difference. And in this case, there was an over-the-top pass to Auston Matthews, who just sort of squeezed by the Bruins defender, kind of caught him a little bit flat-footed. He had a clear breakaway, and Auston Matthews is the kind of guy where if he's on a one-on-one with the goalie, he probably ain't missing. That's going to be a very clear chance for him. He put it away pretty safely, and he's made the series a lot more interesting. The Leafs looked a little bit like they were out of ideas in the first game. Second game, they seemingly recovered for him, and I think that is a huge confidence boost for a team that, quite frankly, is kind of floundering right now. They seem to have not much of an identity, and I think they're sort of trying to figure out who and what kind of team they are. So the Eastern Conference bracket, if you really look at it, it's pretty wide open. There's not a lot of teams that I would say really impressed me. I think this year, more than any other season, we have almost all of the teams that I would anoint as cup contenders all on the Western side. There's a couple of really good teams in the East, the Panthers, the Rangers, Carolina to an extent, although I think their limitations would become pretty apparent in a 7-game series against the West. But you just look at the Western Conference picture, and it is stacked. The West has, 3 or 4 cup contenders, at least bare minimum 3 to 4, maybe even closer to 5. And, it's just a really deep conference, but because of this playoff structure, only one's going to get through, and it is going to be an absolute bloodbath to try and figure out which of these teams is good enough to survive the war of attrition. And once you even get through, your reward is then to probably face a pretty top seed from the East. So not ideal if you're a Central Division team like the Jets are, but, to be the best, you've got to beat the best, or so they always say. For me, I don't know how much I feel inclined to really give that a lot of credence right now, but, for the Jets, first step, get through Colorado, because the Avs are a team that have shown time and time again that they're super resilient. They do not go down without a fight, and they are going to make lives very difficult for the Jets in this evening's game. But of course, the Western Conference playoffs have been pretty wild, all told. The Jets and Avs weren't the only game that got into some pretty crazy numbers. We'll talk about a few more where we saw some very high-scoring results and some surprisingly close affairs. But before we get into all of that, I do want to shout out our friends and partners at FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL, and baseball's in full swing as well, so FanDuel really should be your place to bet on every single game. If you were impressed by the Denver Nuggets and Jamal Murray pulling off a massive comeback against the Lakers, maybe you feel like you can bet on Denver's run of form to finish out their Western Conference Finals. Maybe you're a Jets fan looking to cash in on your fandom. If you think the Jets are going to go all the way, or maybe even just make it to the conference finals, why not place a bet right now? If you're a new customer, it's especially a great time because new customers can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. You can bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. While we're at it, I also do want to shout out our friends and partners at Policygenius. As somebody who goes to a lot of metal concerts and unfortunately has a few hospital visits out of it, you can probably guess that I don't always make the best life choices. Mosh pits, unfortunately, are, well, a bit of a weakness for me, and I'm sure a lot of people have gotten hurt in those before. But while those might be relatively minor injuries, you got to prepare for some of the more serious ones, right? And, you got to have a safety net not only for yourself, but for your family. With Policygenius, you can find life insurance policies that start at just $292 per year for up to $1 million of coverage. Some options offer same-day approval and avoid unnecessary medical exams. Look, I don't want to sound like an alarmist or anything, but you never know when life is going to change for you. And for some of us, we go through some really difficult circumstances where somebody in our family passes on, and you would prefer to have a life insurance policy all set so that your family is taken care of. And that's why Policygenius wants to help you compare your options from top companies, and their team of licensed experts will guide you step by step through the process to find some of the best values that fit your budget and your needs for coverage. They offer tons of quotes from America's top insurers with just a quick few clicks to help you find the policy that matches your need. Check life insurance off your to-do list in no time with Policygenius. Head to policygenius.com/LockedOnNHL or click the link in the description to get your free life insurance quotes and see how you can save with Policygenius. That's policygenius.com/LockedOnNHL. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are just quickly wrapping up with some thoughts on round one, game one, really for most of these playoff series. Game one for the Western Conference has been pretty crazy. The Eastern Conference actually has a few series that have already gone to game two. The Jets are about to play theirs later today, so that's exciting. But in terms of opening games for the West, right? First one that really comes to mind outside of Jets Avs, Stars Knights. That was a crazy first game, very close. Dallas, I think, created more scoring opportunities and was generally the better team. The problem for Dallas was that they conceded 3 or 4 goals within the first half of the game. And the thing with the Knights is that despite being a squad that's really predicated on fast counters and rapid puck movement and stuff, this is a team that's surprisingly comfortable with playing a dump and chase sort of style. I think they showed very clearly that they're happy to clog the neutral zone. They're happy to dump the puck down the ice and just let Dallas keep stretching back and forth, trying to get the puck, trying to make those retrievals, and then create offense out of it, right? The Knights have kind of used, in some ways, Dallas's playbook against it, and I think it was very disruptive. I think it did a good job for much of the game until Dallas started warming up towards the second half. Once the Stars started getting rolling, Logan Thompson, who hasn't played a lot recently, just came back from injury. He looked rusty, and he was kind of besieged with some really dangerous chances. I think Dallas may have missed connecting on a few of their best opportunities, but this was clearly a game between two cup contenders, and I think all of the stuff that's kind of been said about Vegas's run of form recently, you might want to stop considering that, because Mark Stone came in, of course, off of LTIR, scored a goal in the first 2 minutes. Tomas Hertl also scored a power play goal. So whatever you think about this team from their regular season form, it's probably not something you want to rely on. The Knights are back. They look dangerous, and they played some cup contending caliber hockey against a team playing at their best too. But the one difference was that Ottinger let in a couple more opportunities early, and that was enough to decide the rest of the game. So a very interesting series. I would call that one very much a coin flip. Obviously, the Knights winning game one is really bad news for the Stars. 70% of teams, like I said, tend to go on to win these series if they win game one. But, Dallas is a good enough team to where they might recover and, storm a bit of a comeback. Like I said, they did outplay Vegas for long stretches of the game. It's now just figuring out a way past Thompson or whoever's going to be in net and making the most of those opportunities. In the Vancouver-Nashville series, very funny game because that was a very low-event game for the most part. Nashville played a very patient defensive game. They really didn't give the Canucks much. Vancouver found it very difficult to create offense out of anything. And then late in the game, Nashville ended up taking the lead, and it seemed like Vancouver kind of felt like the life had been sucked out of the game. But then they got a tying goal, and within a minute or two later, then they took the lead, and that was enough to where, Nashville started coming out of its shell, and it really didn't favor the Preds, right? Nashville doesn't have the same horses and high-end talent spread throughout the lineup to go against a Nucks team that's got surprisingly good depth all up and down the lineup, right? There's the star talent in Petrosone and Besser and guys like that, but then you've got Dakota Joshua, Connor Garland, these supplementary scorers who provide great offense, great value, and who actually played a pretty pivotal role in this game. I think for the Preds, the big thing is going to be to continue to try and slow the Canucks down. If you can get Vancouver off its game, you have a chance of coming out of that series, but it's going to be really tough, especially with Demko playing as well as he did in the previous game. I thought he looked great. I thought he kept Nashville off the board early because they definitely came out of the gate swinging, and they had a couple of really high-danger chances that Demko had to be wise to early, and he avoided conceding anything silly. So, that's going to be a fun series. Either one of those teams would be whoever will probably face out of the Edmonton-LA series, which at this point it looks like Edmonton's going to win. I know that it's just the first game, and they did win 7-4, which might make you think the Kings were decent, but the reality was the series, or not the series, but this game was over pretty early. Edmonton sort of ran the score up. They basically made the Kings look very pedestrian. And when you think about the quality of this Oilers offense, not really shocking. The Kings aren't that great. They're aging, and the Dubois trade really has not panned out for them the way that they anticipated, right? He's kind of playing it like a middle six role, and they expected him to be the guy who was going to be the number 2 behind Kopitar. So it's clearly not gone according to plan. I know he scored a bit of a lucky goal in this one, but I think the general tale of the tape is that Edmonton dominated from almost start to finish. The Kings basically got a couple of lucky breaks, a couple of deflections and stuff that kept them in it just enough to look promising, but not enough to actually be much of a real threat. So Edmonton probably has a pretty easy path towards, what's going to be their Pacific Conference matchup against likely Vancouver, unless the Preds come out of that one and make it more of an interesting face-off against a Central Division rival. But I would anticipate Vancouver probably coming out of the series. They've got the 1-0 lead already. Assuming they win game 2, they've got a pretty commanding series lead if they do that. And, it's more about who's going to emerge out of the Central, because the mixture of Dallas, Vegas, and Colorado versus Vegas all vying for one spot, all I can say is it's going to be really tough for the Jets to come out of this one. Winnipeg arguably has one of the hardest routes of any team in the postseason. You've got to go through Colorado and then one of Dallas or Vegas to have a shot at the Western Conference Finals. And that's just cruel. If you look at the other conference pathways, I don't know that any team has the sheer amount of quality and skill and playoff experience that the Jets are going up against. We've got 2 friggin' Stanley Cup champions of the last few years in our side of the bracket. That's just not fair, man. Like, could you imagine a stupider and more difficult challenge for a team? But by the same token, if you really want to find out if the Jets are truly worth it, if they're good enough to advance, they've got to take care of business and try and get through this playoff run. But man, do I kind of wish at this point that the Jets were in the Pacific. That might have been a little bit nicer, but you don't get to pick your opponents. It is what it is. Let's just hope that tonight's game is an absolute stunner for the Jets. Be sure to tune in tomorrow to hear how the game actually went. We'll have coverage of that, some thoughts, and hopefully I get to talk about a win, because I certainly am not, wanting to see the Jets have to go on the road and steal at least one win in Colorado. If they can come away with a 2-0 series lead here and put themselves in the driver's seat, that's going to make me feel a lot better about the outcome of the series. But let me know what your predictions are. I think this one's going to be 5-4 Jets. Let me know what you think in the comments below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets on Twitter. For tonight's episode, though, that is going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. Tune in tomorrow again for Jets coverage of the game against Colorado. And like I said, let's hope for a big win. But for tonight's episode, that's all the time that we have. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you back here tomorrow. And as always, go Jets go.